There's a place the maps forgot, where even vultures circle with caution, and men bury their sins beneath cracked earth and silence. That place is called Ashevale Drift, if it's called anything at all. Perched atop a dry plateau, where the wind howls like a widow mourning a war long past, Ashevale Drift sits half-broken, the wood of its shacks splintered by dust storms and heat. To the west, jagged buttes claw at the sky like rusted blades. To the east lies Dry Widow's Hollow, a stretch of cursed land too parched for mercy and too old for truth. The hollow was once called something else, something the elders refused to speak now, but stories stuck to it like burrs to a boot heel. No birds flew over it. No cattle grazed near it. Even the rattlers slithered wide. Ashevale Drift had once known a better name, a place where cattle herds thundered across open fields, and the saloon rang with the song of coin and fiddle. But those days dried up like a river in August. Now, the town was ruled not by law or decency, but by fear wrapped in ritual. Mayor Jediah Luntz claimed the title of leader, though he was no more than a man grown fat off scraps of old authority. He rarely left his office unless forced to stand behind a preacher at Sunday sermons, nodding like a puppet whose strings tangled years ago. Deacon Eli Morrow, tall, skeletal, eyes like oil lamps burning too low, kept the townsfolk God-fearing and ground-bound. His church rose like a splintered cross at the edge of town, painted blood-red and scorched black, where lightning had struck once, but never again. He preached doom mostly, fire mostly, sometimes redemption, but only if the winds were right. Then there was Colby Boone, oldest man still riding, with one cloudy eye and a kindness that hadn't yet been beaten out of him. He ran his ranch outside town, a sprawl of dying land and broken fences. His wife gone, his son dead in some pointless skirmish on the border years back. Boone said little, drank even less, but when he spoke, folks listened, though they didn't always follow. It was Boone who first mentioned the goats. Found 3 of his lying dead one morning, their bellies bloated, tongues curled like dry leather. Then it happened again, and again, not just to Boone, but to the Learys, the Chantrys, and finally poor little Polly Hodge, who tried raising to himself behind the tannery. Each carcass bore the same strange mark near the neck. At first, they said wolves, then poison, then disease. But the children whispered of something else. They spoke of a woman with tangled hair and blood on her face, said she walked the fields when the moon rose full and left no prints behind. Wren, they called her, though no one knew why. Some kids thought she was a ghost. Others swore she tried to talk to them, but only made the sound of wind through bone. Adults dismissed it as fancies. Still, locks were checked twice. Lamps burned longer. Salt was tossed across thresholds. Then, into this withering world, rode a man the wind seemed to part for. He came from the hollow's direction, though no sane man ever did. Silas Roan, they later learned his name was. He rode a tall black mare, with pale eyes like desert frost. The horse moved like a shadow on oil, noiseless, sure-footed, and unafraid. Silas himself looked carved from flint, lean frame, silver-streaked hair falling just past his collar, face weathered but not old. He wore a long coat dusted gray, spurs that chimed softly with each step, and a quiet that filled space heavier than words. He nodded to none, spoke even less. But when he passed, folks felt something settle in the air, like the pressure before a storm, or the long hush before a gun is drawn. No one knew where he'd come from, but plenty speculated. Some said he'd once ridden with the Blue Vultures, a band of frontier raiders that vanished into legend after a canyon ambush. Others whispered he was a rider of ash, one of the outlaws turned executioners, said to serve justice where no law reached. Boone said nothing, just watched Roan tether his horse outside the empty shack near the smithy, same one no man had lived in for years. Silas paid no mind to their stares. He set about restoring the shack, repaired the hinges, planted a tree, fed stray dogs, then began taking in what others left behind, an orphaned calf, a 3-legged dog, a half-blind barn cat. He gave nothing but silent effort, his hands always moving, always fixing. The townsfolk didn't know what to make of him. Men didn't arrive in Ashevale Drift without reason, and if they did, they didn't stay. By the second week, The children stopped whispering about Wren. Then, one dawn, Samuel Leary's daughter didn't come home. She'd gone to the spring just outside the hollow with a tin bucket and hadn't returned. Her father found the bucket overturned beside a flat stone blackened by heat. No footprints. No struggle. Just the stench of something wrong. That night, a smell rolled through town like rot from a graveyard, thick and sickening. It came from the south end, past the livery, near a long-abandoned structure known as Emberthorn Barn. No one had used it in years. Colby Boone, trusting his old instincts, followed the scent alone, rifle in hand. He passed the rusted hinges and dead vines. The smell grew worse. And then he heard it. A thump. A rattle. A cry. He pressed his ear against the faded slats of a small, crooked shed beside the barn. Inside, something moved. Something alive. The lock was old but not rusted shut. And someone had bolted it from the outside. Boone stepped back. His fingers trembled. He looked once more at the town behind him, then at the dark mouth of the shed. It rattled again. To be continued. The shed door gave way with a groan that sounded too much like a dying thing. Colby Boone stepped back as the heavy plank tumbled aside, and the thick, foul air within spilled out into the dry night. Even the wind, sharp and steady moments before, seemed to draw its breath and hold it. In the flicker of lamplight, the gathered townsfolk saw her. A girl, though it took a moment for the fact to settle. Her hair hung in a matted, black snarl, caked with dirt and blood. Her skin, what little could be seen beneath the grime, was pale and raw in places, with angry burns at her wrists where rough rope had bitten deep. She crouched low in the corner, feral as any mountain cat, between two bloated, stiffening goat carcasses. The stink of decay clung to her like a second skin. Her eyes met theirs, and a hush fell upon the dozen or so souls who'd gathered. Large, dark, and too sharp for a child's, those eyes gleamed with something that sent a shiver up Boone's spine. It wasn't madness, nor fear. It was something else. Something old. She hadn't spoken a word. The silence broke when Deacon Eli Morrow stepped forward, the cross around his neck catching the light like a drawn blade. He stared at the girl with an expression of revulsion and grim satisfaction, as though a prophecy had been fulfilled. "Devil's work," he hissed. "Mark my words. A child of perdition, born of sin and shadow. She's no orphan of Ashvale, I'll tell you that." The murmurs began then, voices rising and falling like a windstorm about to break. Mayor Jedediah Luntz, sweating despite the cool night, cleared his throat and spoke as though the words were ash in his mouth. "We will deal with this at first light. Best not leave her to foul the streets come morning. Tie her outside the drift and be done with it." A low murmur of uneasy agreement rippled through the crowd. No one wanted to touch her. No one wanted to look too long. Colby Boone, God bless his worn bones, stepped forward, voice hoarse but steady. "She's a child, Jed. A sick, half-starved girl by the looks. Ain't no harm in letting her stay the night in a cell, away from beasts and men alike. The doc can see to her wounds." Morrow turned his glare on Boone. "And who'll pay the price, Colby? You, old man. Will you carry the burden when the land turns dry and the hollow's curse returns?" Boone's jaw clenched, but he said no more. He didn't have to. Another voice cut through the arguing, low and quiet but sharp as a whetted knife. "She sleeps in my home tonight." Heads turned. Silas Roan stood at the edge of the crowd, his coat a shadow against the flickering lamplight, silver-streaked hair tousled by the restless wind. His mare, Dust Bane, waited behind him, pale-eyed and still. The townsfolk parted instinctively, like weeds before a scythe. Deacon Morrow sneered. "You'd claim a cursed child under your roof? Damn yourself with her black soul." Silas didn't answer with words. He merely stared, and something in that long, cold gaze made Morrow flinch. Without waiting for permission or blessing, Silas stepped into the shed's threshold. The girl shrank at first, but when his hand reached for her, open and palm up, she hesitated. A breathless, strangled sound escaped her lips, a half-formed word, or maybe a bird's call. "Easy now," Silas murmured. "Ain't no harm coming, not from me." Somehow, she let him lift her, light as a broken branch, and carry her out into the night. Ashvale Drift divided that night. Half the town spat at the ground when he passed. The other half crossed themselves, or watched with something close to hope in their eyes, though none dared speak it. Boone, for his part, simply nodded once as Silas passed, a silent prayer etched in his weathered face. At Roan's ranch, a quiet, lonely sprawl of earth and broken fence posts, Silas laid the girl on a cot beside the hearth. He stripped away the filth and tended to her burns with rough but steady hands, swabbing with vinegar and old balm. She never cried out, though her breath caught each time the rag touched skin. "You're a tough one," he muttered, setting down the cloth. She lay watching him, dark eyes unblinking. When a small bird flitted onto the windowsill outside, she made a soft sound in her throat, a fragile, almost melodic chirp. "Wren," Silas said quietly. "That's what I'll call you." She blinked once. He thought, maybe, a hint of recognition stirred behind those strange eyes. As he worked, old memories unbidden crept through the cracks in his mind. The feel of a tiny hand in his, the sound of a child's laughter rising with the dawn wind, a grave beneath a lone willow, long since withered. No time for ghosts. Night deepened. The wind rose. And when Silas stepped outside to check the stock, he found a mark burned into the barn door. A crude fork symbol, drawn with a heated brand. The kind cattlemen used for curses in the old border wars. A sign meaning death to livestock, ruin to land, and blight upon the soul. The town had made its decision. He ran his hand over the mark, fingers brushing the scorched wood, his jaw set like stone. Inside, Wren slept fitfully, the flicker of fire painting her face in uneasy shadow. But before the night was done, she woke with a scream so sharp it cut the dark. Silas was beside her in an instant. Her eyes rolled, her lips moving in words no tongue in Ashvale spoke. A language older than the town, older than the maps. Her voice was thin and piercing, a bird trapped in a burning cage. And somewhere outside, in the lean-to by the corral, the goats dropped dead. Every last one. Come dawn, the wind carried the scent of death across Ashvale Drift, and no one dared knock on Silas Roan's door. The dawn came brittle and colorless, a pale smear against the horizon. Ashvale Drift sat heavy in the uneasy hush, as if the land itself held its breath. The goats lay where they'd fallen, eyes glassy, their corpses already drawing flies in lazy, widening spirals. Silas Roan stood over them, his face a stone mask. The stench curled into his nostrils, but he'd smelled worse things in his time. He crouched low, calloused fingers brushing the dirt beside one stiffened carcass. The ground was marked, not just with hoof prints and drag trails, but old symbols carved into the dust. Forked lines, crooked circles, crude loops forming something older than the town. There were smears too, faded streaks of dried blood leading away from the corral, cutting a path toward the hollow's edge. He followed them. The trail ran behind Emberthorn Barn, past the ruined fence line, toward the leaning shack known to the locals as Widow Nellie's place. The old woman had outlived 2 husbands, 3 sons, and most of her mind, but she knew the history of Ashvale like Bones knew the earth. The wind stirred dead leaves as Silas approached, and the door sagged open before he touched it. Inside, old Nellie sat by a blackened hearth, rocking in her chair, hair the color of cobwebs, one hand twisting the hem of a threadbare shawl. Her eyes were filmy, but when they fixed on Silas, they cleared just enough for recognition. "Rider o' Ash," she croaked, as if naming something she'd long feared would return. "I need words," Silas said. "No greeting, no pretense." Time was a thing bleeding out. She cackled low, a dry, papery sound. "You'd best be off, boy. Ain't no saving what's rooted deep in dirt and blood. The hollow always comes back to claim what's hers." "What is she?" he asked, meaning the girl. "And what's this town done?" Old Nellie's smile was a broken thing. "You ever hear tell of the Hollow Creed?" Silas's jaw clenched. That name was old, older than law out here. Thought they were dust. They was dust. Till they weren't. She leaned closer, her breath sour with age and madness. When the first settlers come to Ashvale, the land was mean. Crops failed, herds miscarried, babies come sick. They made a deal, them folk. Whispered it in the dry dark. Promised blood for rain. Livestock, then children, when the goats weren't enough. The hollow took it all. Silas felt the cold threat of it knot in his gut. They buried the old rites. Nellie went on, voice soft. But some didn't forget. The bad seasons came again. The menfolk remembered what worked. Morrow's kin were high in it then, calling on dry spirits, the night-born ones, carving signs in bone and dirt. Preacher Morrow's bloodline's been bound to it since the start. And the girl, she's blood of the hollow too, Nellie rasped, or near enough for their liking. Born under a dying moon, orphaned, left out there to starve. The land marked her. She was meant for the old pen, sacrificed to wake the rain and keep the dust down. Nellie pointed a crooked finger. The shed was a blood pen. They still use it. Them ones loyal to the old ways. You think them goat deaths were sickness? Them goats fed the right. The girl was to finish it. Silas cursed low, a word meant for no man's ears. The pieces fit too cleanly. The fear in the town. The preacher's hatred. The old mark on his barn door. They mean to finish it still. Nellie warned. They'll rise at dusk, your name spoken in dark places. The rest of the day thickened like spoiled milk. Word spread fast in Asheville Drift. About the girl. About the goats. About how the wind felt wrong and shadows moved where no man walked. Some called her a curse, others a devil. A few muttered worse things. By midday, Silas made his decision. He'd take the girl and ride at first light. Get her as far from the hollow as spurs, and Will could carry. Dustbane was saddled and ready by the well. His rifle cleaned, the silver token around his neck tucked beneath his shirt. As the sun sank, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. Colby Boone. The old man dismounted stiffly, face pale and drawn. He carried no rifle, only a half-empty bottle in one hand and weariness in his bones. They're stirring, Roan, Boone rasped. Morrow's riled him. Says the girl's the cause of it all. The drought, the deaths, the hollow's curse. He means to gather the town come sundown, march on your land, burn you out. Take her. I'm leaving before dawn, Silas said. Boone hesitated. His hand, gnarled and scarred, touched his chest. Would have rode with you years back. Could have left this cursed hole. He gave a rough laugh. Nowhere left to run. Silas opened the door, and Wren stood within, pale, too thin, but her eyes clearer than they'd been. She stepped forward, and without a word, placed her small hand over Boone's chest. He flinched, then stiffened. His eyes widened. The old bullet wound he'd carried for 20 years, the one that ached in winter, went silent. The ache faded. The pressure eased. A warmth bloomed under his ribs, as though some deep poison had been drawn out. What in the hell? Boone whispered. She's no ordinary child, Silas said, and she won't die here. Boone looked into the girl's eyes and saw something he'd only glimpsed in old stories by firelight. Not evil, not curse, power, something half forgotten by men too cowardly to claim it. He nodded. Then you won't ride alone. But the town had already begun its gathering. Deacon Morrow's voice carried on the wind, a litany of old curses and twisted scripture. The faithful came with lanterns and axes. The weak followed with fear thick in their mouths. Asheville Drift turned ugly before the night was through. As Boone settled his rifle across the saddle horn, Dustbane reared, spooked by something unseen in the growing dark. The horses stamped and snorted as a shape moved at the edge of sight. A figure too thin, too tall, limping through the hollow's brittle grass. Eyes like hot coals in a skull's hollow. The old stories were never stories. And the night was coming. Night fell with a colorless hush, the land painted in a sickly shade between gray and ash. The hollow breathed a different kind of air, thick and restless, carrying with it the scent of dust, old blood, and something older still. Silas Roan stood before his ranch house, rifle in hand, Colby Boone beside him, the two men framed by the last dying light of dusk. Across the yard, a mob gathered like a sickness made flesh. Lanterns bobbed, axes gleamed, and at the front stood Deacon Eli Morrow, his face shadowed by the flickering light, eyes alive with something halfway between righteousness and madness. Beside him, Mayor Luntz, looking half drunk on fear, held a trembling torch. "You'll hand her over, Roan," Morrow called, voice thick with hate. "This is a plague upon our land. You know the rights. You know what she is." "I know what you are," Silas answered coldly. At his side, Wren stood barefoot on the cracked earth, her hair like black ink, her eyes reflecting the firelight unnaturally, as though a storm brewed behind them. She said nothing, but her silence was heavier than all the voices gathered against her. "She's a blight," Morrow shouted. "You've seen the goats. The land rots beneath her feet. She dies, the land lives." "You don't know a damn thing about life," Boone spat, leveling his old rifle. Tension crackled through the dark, like a storm about to break. The gathered mob fidgeted, caught between terror and superstition, each man watching the other for the first move. Then someone hurled a bottle. It shattered against the side of Roan's barn, flame catching fast on the dry, brittle wood. The blaze rose hungrily, sending orange tongues licking skyward. The spell was broken. The mob surged forward. Gunfire cracked. Silas fired once, twice, dropping the first two men, who dared cross the fence line. Boone's rifle sang out beside him, each shot sure and savage. But they were two against the tide, and the tide had no mercy. A shot rang out, and Boone staggered, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. He went to one knee, teeth clenched. "Damn it all," Boone coughed, blood at the corner of his mouth. At that moment, Wren let out a sound that didn't belong to any throat born of man or beast. It rose sharp and shrill, splitting the night like glass, a cry that rattled the bones of every living thing for miles. The wind howled in response. The fire twisted, turning blue at its heart. The sky darkened, clouds boiling out of nowhere, smothering starlight. Ashvale drifts cursed earth stirred. The ground itself seemed to shift, as though waking from centuries of uneasy sleep. The townsfolk faltered, and then the madness took them. Old grudges, long buried beneath the pretense of neighborly civility, burst forth. Ephraim Leary turned his axe on Winton Caro, screaming about a debt unpaid since the flood of '72. Ruth Mallow drove a pitchfork through her brother's belly over a secret no one else even knew. The mob turned on itself, driven mad by something ancient stirring in their blood. Silas watched it unravel with cold eyes. He'd seen this before. Years ago, as a younger man, a gun for hire, with no last name worth claiming. He'd ridden under the Creed Huntsman, a hard company tasked with putting down cursed bloodlines. Witches, oath-breakers, hex-bloods, the things that wore human faces and carried old sins in their veins. He believed the hollow cleansed. He believed the last bloodlines burned. But they hadn't. And now the last spark of that cursed line stood barefoot in the dirt beside him, eyes wide, hair wild, face streaked with ash and blood, yet innocent, unclaimed by the darkness they feared. He turned toward Morrow. The preacher stood unmoved amidst the carnage, torch held high, his face rapturous. "You see now, Roan. She's the storm. You think this is your doing? It's hers. End her, and the land lives. End her, and the curse breaks." "No," Silas said quietly, his voice a flint spark. "This isn't her storm. It's yours." He strode forward as Morrow raised his cross, sputtering scripture. But words were dust. Silas grabbed the rusted branding iron from a smoldering pile beside the fence, the same one they'd meant for Wren, and drove it hard into Morrow's chest. The old man's eyes bulged, his scream lost in the rising howl of wind and flame. The brand seared through cloth and flesh alike, the ancient mark burning away his heart's deceit. Morrow dropped, the light fleeing his gaze. In that instant, the storm broke. The earth bucked. The fire leapt higher. The sky cracked open. Wren's power flooded forth, a wave of heat and hunger that scorched the earth clean. The guilty, those whose hands had bound her and fed the hollow in secret, were the first to fall. Flesh burned, bones blackened, and the ground drank their ash. Only Boone, his life ebbing, and Silas stood untouched in the maelstrom. When it was done, only charred ruin remained of the mob. The hollow lay still. The wind gentled. Silas knelt by Boone. The old man's breath rattled. "Hell of a thing, Roan," Boone whispered, half a grin on his bloodied lips. "You'll see the dawn. Ain't much left for me in it," Boone rasped. but it was worth it. Silas nodded, the weight of old sins heavy on his shoulders. Wren came to him then, small hand in his, her strange, storm-lit eyes meeting his. In them he saw no malice, no madness, only what the world had made her, and what it might yet make of him. Dawn broke over Ashvale Drift like a pale eye opening over a field of bones. The wind had died in the small hours, leaving the land eerily silent, the world caught in a moment between what had been and what might come. Smoke rose in lazy columns from the ruins of Roan's barn, and the blackened corpses of the mob lay where they'd fallen, twisted remnants of old hatred and older fear. The town, what remained of it, was a hollow thing. Windows shattered, doors swinging loose in the windless morning. Those few who'd survived the night's madness either wandered dazed in the streets, murmuring to ghosts only they could see, or had packed what little they owned and fled into the Badlands without a word, leaving their homes to rot and fall in the sun. The cursed land around Dry Widow's Hollow had grown strangely still. The sickly color in the sky faded, the wind stripped of its old bitterness. Whatever ancient darkness had lain coiled in the earth had, for now, retreated. But it left behind no peace, only a land emptied of its people and thick with the memory of blood. On the porch of Silas Roan's ranch house, Colby Boone lay propped against the wall, a blanket over his legs, his skin pale as old parchment. The fire in him had burned bright through the night, but dawn found his body failing fast. Blood loss, age, and the weight of too many years watching a cursed town eat itself alive. Silas knelt beside him, his weathered hand resting on Boone's shoulder. "You did good, Colby," Silas said quietly, voice low and rough with dust and grief. Boone managed a weak grin, his one good eye finding Silas's. "Took me long enough," he croaked. "Fool old man should have seen it sooner." "You saw it when it counted." Boone coughed, a rough, rattling sound that seemed to tear loose what breath he had left. "Ain't afraid," he murmured. "Hell never was afraid of death. Only thing ever scared me was dying with nothing worth remembering left behind." His gaze drifted toward the small figure standing by the fence. Wren stood barefoot in the dirt, her hair tangled, skin smudged with ash. The glow of the night's fury was gone, leaving her small and thin and impossibly quiet. Yet her eyes, they held something the land hadn't known in years. A calm, a strange, impossible hope. Boone managed to chuckle, though it hurt him. "She'll be something, won't she?" Silas looked toward her, and for the first time in years, something close to warmth flickered in his chest. "She already is." Boone's hand gripped Silas's wrist, strength returning for a final, fleeting moment. "You get her clear, Roan. You keep her safe. Don't let the world turn her mean like it did the rest of us." "I swear it." A breath. A sigh. Boone's hand went slack. Silas sat there a long moment, feeling the old man's warmth fade from his skin, the quiet settling around them like a final benediction. The sun had climbed half a hand's breadth when Wren finally approached, kneeling beside Boone's still form. She placed her tiny hand on his weathered face, closed his one good eye with a tenderness that made Silas's throat tighten. Then she spoke for the first time. A single word. "Home." The word hung in the morning air, soft and certain, heavier than any sermon Morrow had ever preached. Silas's eyes closed, and when they opened again, the weight of the past night seemed to settle on his shoulders for good. He rose, went to the corral where Dustbane waited, and began packing what few supplies remained. Waterskins, dried meat, a blanket, a rifle slung over his saddle horn. Wren waited by Boone's side until the last strap was cinched. He held a hand out to her. She took it. Without a word, they left Ashvale Drift behind. They rode west at first, following no road, cutting through gulches and dried creek beds. Dustbane's hooves left no trail in the dust, as though the earth itself chose not to remember their passage. The world beyond the hollow felt cleaner, the air easier to draw. In the weeks that followed, rumors began to spread. Tales whispered in border saloons and trading posts of a rider in a gray coat and a dark-haired girl with storm-bright eyes, of how drought-choked lands would green at their passing, wells long dry would run cold and clear, dead orchards sprouting new leaves. towns on the edge of ruin finding their fields reborn. Some said it was a trick. Others swore it was a curse disguised as blessing. A few claimed it was the work of old gods stirring, debts being repaid. And always, in the telling, was mention of Ashvale Hollow, a place now abandoned, cursed for all time, of how a town full of sin had turned on itself in a single terrible night. Some said the devil had walked its streets, others, an angel with a broken wing. But those were stories. As for Silas and Wren, they made no home for long. A cabin here, a shack there, never resting more than a season, always moving with the restless winds. Yet wherever they passed, the land remembered. At dusk, old men with long memories would sit by their fires and murmur. They say the devil walks in men's hearts, but I've seen a child tame a curse. And if the wind ever turns wrong, remember this: a name once whispered in dry Widow's Hollow, and the earth remembers. The nights grew easier, the storms fewer, but wherever Silas looked, he saw the old darkness, still watching from the corners of the land, patient as stone, waiting for the world to forget. And sometimes, when Wren thought no one was watching, her eyes would flicker, just for a moment, a deep, impossible black. Not cruel at all, but old, older than rain, older than ash, older than the sins men buried in blood-soaked soil and tried to forget. And Silas would tighten his grip on the reins, set his gaze westward, and ride on,